John 13:21-32. After saying this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared, "Very truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So, while reclining next to Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." So, when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you are going to do." Now, no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that, because Judas had the common purse, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the festival," or that he should go and give something to the poor. So, after receiving the piece of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once."
Right, okay. So, right. So what are people's emotional reaction to this? If any?
It always strikes me when he says, "Go and do what you must do." It's so, so intense and significant sort of statement.
You know something bad is going to happen next.
Yeah. Yes.
No spoilers there, but
It's quite an intense passage, isn't it?
Certainly. Yeah.
Okay. What's the setting? What do you think the context is? In fact, is perhaps an easy way into it. What's going on?
They're having dinner in the upper room?
Yes, it's the Last Supper, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
or in 13 separate upper rooms.
Yeah, that's right. Did we share the Upper Zoom cartoon that's been going around?
Yes.
Yeah.
And who? So set the settings, the upper room, or Jesus Zoom channel. Who are the characters?
The disciples.
And in particularly Simon Peter and Judas, Jesus. The nameless one he loved.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And one more.
Oh, Satan.
Satan. Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to do anything particularly in the evening, but it's good to name it.
It is very sad actually to reflect that this is their last meal together. You know, I mean, obviously the Last Supper, but you know, it's the last time that Jesus will sit with his friends, and this horrible betrayal is going on as part of it.
Yeah,
and of which most of them are completely oblivious.
Yes.
Which is quite a good summary, actually. So, can anyone know what happened before and after this?
Well,
Very famous things about to happen.
Yeah.
They go into the garden and pray?
Yes. What's the very next thing that happens? It only happens in John. We often have a picture of it. I often use
foot washing.
Foot washing. Yeah, foot washing. That's
okay.
Shortly afterwards. Did anyone pick up any scriptural references? I don't think I did particularly. Yeah. I guess only to the other Gospels, I suppose, if that counts. Okay, so I've got a discussion question, which I'm going to break us into groups for. Did God cause Judas to betray Jesus, or somehow make it happen? So this is a place of flying theological kites, and so no one's being held to account for what they say here. Just at top of mind, what have you been taught? Actually, I might just claim the host. No, okay. And I'll put us into groups so I can work out how to do it. Sorry, some nights this works really well, and some days I've just not got the I don't seem to have the
Do you have the capacity to put people into groups?
Yeah, I usually do.
Yeah, even though you're not the host.
Well, I've just reclaimed the host inside.
Oh, have you? Okay.
I might just stop the share for a minute, and then yes, it's but only when you have a host. It goes away again. Thanks, Joe. Okay, I'll turn it back on again. That's interesting. The break into groups thing doesn't seem to show up when you're sharing a screen.
Oh.
Right, I'll just pause the share for a second. I'll break us into groups. Let's say there's 3, 6, 9, 11 of us. So let's say 3 rooms. Okay, so did God cause Judas to betray Jesus, and why?
Or why not?
Or why not? Yeah,
Which,
and that's what
why, whatever your reason, whatever your
Yeah.
answer. Yeah,
precisely.
yeah. Oh, hello. Hi.
Hello.
It's always exciting, isn't it? Who are you going to
I
pick?
know.
It's like a sort of massively random kind of. So, Joe, are you at your mum's house? Is that where you are? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, mum
Who
and
else is
dad.
coming?
And Simon is next door at the moment writing an essay for
Okay.
university.
All right. What's he doing?
He's studying geography and international relations
Oh.
at an Australia-based university, Perth Curtin University.
All right. Was he doing that when you were in Australia, or?
Yeah, he's been doing a couple of units all the time, just fitting it around work and
Yes.
things.
And moves and travel and all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daisy. Hi, Jocelyn.
So
Hello. Turning on the heater. Got a little dog snoring next to me.
I think Daisy has some strong
Daisy.
opinions about this passage.
Yeah.
What do you think, Daisy? Do you think?
What's that question? Would God force somebody to do something evil?
Yeah.
it's a difficult moral, I don't know. Yeah. Question, isn't it?
It seems unlikely.
Yeah.
I would
That's
want
what I would have
to
thought.
know. But Alistair wants us to say why we think whatever it is we think as well. So
It kind of raises questions about, well, for me, I feel like it raises questions about predestination and
Yes,
things like that.
exactly.
If you're saying that he did make him do that, it kind of fits in with that line of thinking, doesn't it, I suppose? That he was predestined to do that, and that was his only purpose for being born, and all of these kind of questions.
And I guess there are quite a few people who have strong views about that whole predestination thing. Also, just that idea that you can never know, but all you can do is keep working it out. And that idea that nobody should be chosen, and that anybody who's chosen shows God's love. It's a very it's a very sort of it's not a great view of God.
No, it isn't, is it? It's it sort of takes
very
out
limited or
agency.
very yeah. I struggle with that.
Yeah.
What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I was thinking, because it takes away the idea of free will, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which then implies that we're just
Puppets.
created to be kind of part of a story that's already written, which we have no participation or real participation in.
No real agency. Yeah.
Yeah, agency. Thank you.
Agency, yeah. Which kind of makes sense when he says, "Oh, go and do what you know." It's almost like go and do what you've chosen to do, or what you must do. But I must do in the sense that he knows what will happen, but not necessarily that he has to do it. That he's a puppet.
Yeah. How long do we have, by the way? I forgot.
I don't know. He didn't say, did he?
So we're saying, are we saying kind of we don't think God told Judas to do it, really? What were the words? Were force and cause, was it?
Force or cause was what Alistair said. I'm surely not. Surely
Yeah,
God.
I agree.
Force or cause. I think we agree with that, don't we?
Yeah.
Partly because we just don't think it. We think that just takes away all human agency.
It does.
I'm just looking at the passage. I've just looked it up on Bible Gateway just to see whether there was anything in there about that. No, I don't think, because sometimes it's always interesting, isn't it? Sometimes the scriptures say things like, and this happened to fulfill what was said, blah, 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 which can almost sound as if it's been kind of puppet-like kind of maneuvering of people, but I don't think it really means it in quite that way, even when it does say that. But it doesn't say that in this passage anyway. So,
What was the second part of the question?
Just to say why we think whatever it is we think.
Okay.
For me, it's outside of the character of God. My view of the character of God.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, we've got to go back.
Well,
return to main session.
See you in the main session.
I feel like it's the Brady Bunch. I don't know whether it's outside of people's context.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be back.
Liberty Squares.
Actually, I'll be back too.
I spilled my cup of coffee and now my sock's all wet. Oh no.
Very good.
Oh well.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
But Joe, your hair looks perfect today, so you've got that. Don't worry about the sock. Your hair looks perfect.
Thanks, Leanne. I think it's just the light from the window.
Always sit there for your online class.
My sock might be damp and my hair is perfect.
And we're back.
Oh wow, this is freaking me out a bit. Like,
There's no free will.
Not a lot of free ones. Not much free ones in, that's for sure.
Did we decide to go back to the main group, or was
No. No, it
was inevitable?
I'm a pitiless God.
this is the kind of power you've wanted at the pub for a long time.
It's been very frustrating all of a sudden. Come on, everyone back to group. Let's make it happen. It's definitely the upside of this. Okay, just waiting for Anne and Jocelyn to get back.
Yes, I'm back.
There's one.
There's Daisy sleeping in her chair. Can you see that?
Oh.
She's all peaceful.
So, what do people think? So, did Judas do it of his own free will, or did God make him do it? And why is it interesting? And why am I asking? I guess is the broader question.
Oh, that's the question. Yeah.
Who knows why you do anything, Alistair?
I'm inscrutable.
Well, we didn't think that God was forcing Judas. We didn't think that that was in the nature of God to do that.
Yeah, Team C, Breakout Room C, we're along the same lines that, God's given free will. So we'd see that Judas would be making a decision according to his own free will, and maybe God could see what was going to happen, knew what was going to happen, but Judas still made the decision in the end.
Yeah. Has anyone who comes from a church which has a very strong predestination kind of line? Nobody.
I've certainly been to a church that had that view.
Yeah, me too.
Astonishing.
More individuals than the actual church, but I've met like people who are very strong into predestination.
Okay. Right. So that's just kind of a reason. So there's the broader context is the slide I took out and maybe shouldn't have done was Tom Wright wrote an article for Time magazine this week about is the business of a church to have answers to this sort of problem? So bad things are happening. What's God doing about it? What's it all mean? And he's arguing that it's not really the church's job to have kind of pat answers for questions like that, but instead to draw on the resources of lament. And I'll send a link around. It's a good article. I should anyway. But I think it brought to one of the crux points, I think, of Christian theology, which is why did Jesus have to die? Or why did Jesus die, perhaps, or something like that. And that's where I want to go. So here's a question. Was the whole Easter thing, Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection, was it God's plan? So can you see, when I do this, can you see just the screen, or can you see I've got everyone's faces on? Can you see that?
I can see everybody's faces.
We can, we aren't seeing your screen though.
Right, you're just seeing the
Faces, yeah.
You trying to share your screen?
I'm trying to share my screen. Am I not successfully sharing my screen?
No. Well, I don't think so.
No.
No, in a word. No, okay. I'm tempting but failing, and now.
Ooh, it worked.
Viewing Anne's screen.
Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone.
Sorry. We're trying to be too clever.
Is it because I'm not the host, though? You tell me.
I thought I'd reclaimed it, but maybe not.
Maybe that's the reason.
Okay.
I've stopped share.
Okay.
Do you want? Can we make you the host?
Yes, I can just reclaim it. Just a minute.
Well, it does say Alistair Pate host actually on mine.
So what can you see on the screen?
Adam just lost his arm to part of a sunset.
Can you see a slide which says God's plan ?
No.
I should never tried to dual screen it.
When you say so, you've got your laptop and your computer working.
Yes. Hang on. I'll just do this. Okay. On screen. Yes. Right, now you've got the slide, yes?
Yeah, now
we've just got black.
Yes,
Yes, we have.
Yeah,
we have now.
There we go.
The slide, and I've got faces.
Excellent.
Yay!
The double screen thing seemed like a good idea, but it's just too complicated for me this time of night. So here's a sort of it's a lot of ways you could ask the same question. Was about the Easter thing, the whole crucifixion, resurrection stuff. Was this God's plan from the start? Is one way of thinking about it. Which is another way of asking sort of who is God, I guess. So in people's church backgrounds, what were they taught about that, if anything?
That it was God's plan.
Yeah.
Was what I was taught, that there was this kind of, this problem of sin that had to be resolved in some way, and therefore this happened.
Was it God's plan from the beginning?
Possibly not from the beginning. Given the fall, that this was God's plan. Like a sort of plan B almost.
Yeah.
That suggests that God is not beyond time and
yeah, I know, of course, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of a tension there, I think, isn't there? Yeah, probably now I can't see my next screen. So, about Andrew, I can talk about Luther with more confidence, because I know Andrew doesn't like Luther very much. So it's kind of...
He could listen to this recording later, though.
Yep. So when you're thinking, when we're thinking about the crucifixion specifically, or about suffering and the world more generally, Luther drew to a sort of, so he's I think it might be Jocelyn. Oops. Luther drew a distinction between what he called the theology of the cross and the theology of glory. So, I'm just doing very loudly, but it's actually quite interesting.
Sorry.
And so it's got two assumptions. So a lot of theology seems like the theology was written first, and then people get sort of squashed into it to fit. So there's this kind of beautifully well-formed theology of all the answers, and then people have to kind of measure up to it. And so reality has to kind of take a bit of a back seat. So the fundamental assumptions of this idea seem to be that theology is made for people, not the other way around. So rather than starting from theoretical questions about God, it tries to start from the actuality of the world, what's actually happening, and his second point is that God, revealed in Jesus, won't abandon the world. So there's something about suffering and feeling abandoned, and something about trust, which we're going to try and explore, I think, over the next 20 minutes. This basically comes from a book called Douglas John Hall's Across in Our Context, which is a worthwhile, if you're interested in questions of suffering and God, then it's a good place to go. So this is Hall's take on the theology of glory. It substitutes obvious, non-paradoxical, unconditional, and immediate awareness of divine presence and glory for a more concealed, tentative, indirect, and paradoxical knowledge of God revealed through the crucified one. It confuses and distorts because it presents divine revelation in a straightforward, undialectical, and authoritarian manner that silences argument, silences doubt, and silences, therefore, real humanity. So I guess it could have, if you can imagine that Palm Sunday, we know what actually happened at the end, but Jesus got crucified, but imagine an alternative history version of Palm Sunday, where Jesus cleansed the temple, went to a palace, Pilate said, "You're obviously the king," had the keys to Jerusalem, "You're now in charge," and then they all went out for a lovely dinner kind of thing. And so Jesus lifted up in a kind of really literal way as the emperor, and life unfolds in a positive way. That's a kind of picture of theology of glory. So we had that beautiful thing from Ely Cathedral just now, but imagine, so it's sort of majestic and beautiful and imperial and powerful. And that's a kind of, when we, our basic understanding of God at quite a deep cultural level, and probably for all cultures, but certainly for ours, is that God's the creator. God's sort of unstained by the world, untouched, sitting in heaven, making stuff happen. And that's the God who is revealed through Jesus is not like that, I guess, is the fundamental kind of point. That God's actually revealed in situations of suffering and doubt and darkness, in God's hiddenness. So respond, say something. What do people reckon to this? Is it just kind of, is it very obvious, or?
We hadn't really thought about the question very much, but Simon said something about it being the inevitable outcome of the human situation that Jesus ends up being killed. And then we were talking about like the idea that someone has to die so that something good can happen is like it's voiced by the high priest in the gospel, and is something that is like supposed to be something that it kind of rejects. But then if it is a plan of God, then you're saying that God is doing the thing that the high priest has said, one man suffering so they're on. I just realized there's a paradox there. So it's sort of saying it's not God's plan. It's the opposite, that Jesus should die. Just got garbled there, sorry.
That's right. It's kind of a question of what is it for God to have a plan, almost. I've got an example of a more straightforward. Do you want to have any other initial reactions before I anxiously rush on?
Only just that plans, I kind of think that maybe we think simplistically about what a plan might be. Like when we're asking, does God have a plan? And I think, yes, did God know that this, and this would happen? Or sorry, did he make this and this happen in a particular way maybe? But maybe it's just more like God can do planning with multiple backup plans. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, Plan D, Plan E, Plan F, Plan G, Plan H, etc. Because maybe he could do that. I don't know. That's just what was in my head.
Yeah, sure.
To my head.
Well, does God even need a plan? Like, why are we fixated on a plan? Is that important?
Yeah.
Maybe a better word is intention. I'm just thinking, does God have a plan right now in this context? And that just feels a bit weird to ask that question. So the word that just came to me was what's God's intention, or what's God's desire now?
In a lot of scripture, it sounds like God has a plan. And I kind of wouldn't want to lose that idea entirely, perhaps.
But I suppose, as Leanne said, we kind of have the word plan has particular connotations for us. And perhaps we often think of it in a very linear kind of, if we do this, then we get that. And a lot of us work in organizations that produce strategic plans and blah, blah, blah. And it can all be a bit sort of, this is our goal and these are the things we're going to do to get there. And maybe that sort of gives us a bit of a bit of a distorted picture of what God's plan might be.
Yeah. These are some good topics we're touching on.
And I think the reason I'm trying to think of the complexity of what God's plan might be is because I do believe that we all have free will. So if you take one person, free will, things change all the time. Two people, free will, okay, things change even more. Well, if the whole world has free will, it's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
So let's look at here's another idea I just want to get out there. So ideology is a word which gets thrown around quite a lot. So Hall's definition is that it's a theoretical statement or system of interpretation that functions for its adherents as a full and sufficient credo, a source of personal authority, and intellectually and psychologically comforting insulation from a frightening and chaotic mishmash of daily existence. Which is it's a theology book, so therefore it's many, many polysyllabic words. But you kind of meet people for whom everything always comes down to the same explanation, like really doctrinaire Marxists or feminists or small government persons. There's always like an answer to every question you've got, and it always turns out that it's the fault of the government or the oppressive class regime or the patriarchy, or there's always there's always an easy answer. Has anyone encountered that and faith can be one of those things. So people, if people encountered ideology kind of in that sort of way, this kind of really rigid way of seeing the world, which doesn't allow for any kind of grace.
I think I've embodied it more than just encountered it.
Yeah. I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a way of trying to handle anxiety, isn't it? To construct something that has all the...
Tareen, were you meaning that you have personally, actually, you've been that way yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah. Even now, I think I have a tendency towards trying to come up with a simplistic baseline that I can take everything back to. And I catch myself that I think I'm saying something else, but when I really try and break it down, it goes back to the same thing.
Yeah.
It's part of the faith development thing, is that like a lot of churches do kind of function like this, and it's as Chris said, it's like a security for people. Like it's clear.
Mm-hmm.
Like all those churches, well, there's not many of them, but there's a few sort of churches who are saying, "Well, the blood of Jesus protects us from infection," and we just pray about it, and so we can just gather. That's an ideology. There's reality, messy reality with sickness, but with my faith, I can pray it away. It's kind of an ideology, isn't it? Because it's not really true, and it's a funny way to think about faith. It's that sort of rigid. It's like idea first. My idea is my faith. The faith can prove that it can do this, and therefore I'll put that first. And then reality just has to conform, or I don't know what I'll ignore it or something.
Yeah, well, it's not reality then, is it?
No,
something's not right. Because the faith, the prism through which you interpret everything in life, it can be explained away by another means. If it's all ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like when the Iranian government says there's no gays in Iran, for instance, there's just this, like, it's obviously nonsense, but the ideology says this, and so they prefer the ideology to horrible, messy reality with all its complexity. Yeah, so one of Hall's points is that the sort of theology of glory, the sort of straightforward God as king telling people what to do, can function as a sort of ideology, but that a good theology should not be like this. It shouldn't be a closed system with all the answers. Which is why this relates to the question of why is God allowing the pandemic sort of question. Like, there's a sort of temptation, I guess, for Christians to say things like, well, God's punishing us for X, Y, and Z. To want to sort of figure out a solution which fits into our system. And Hall's arguing that that's not a very adequate sort of theology. We don't need to have all the answers, I guess. But in fact, actually, by definition, faith is not having all the answers. It's not, in fact, knowledge. Sorry, someone was about to speak and I spoke over.
Oh, it was me, sorry. I was just saying, I think people sometimes want a safety net and they want to feel like if they do the correct maths, they'll get the right answer. And it kind of all fits into that idea of feeling safe, knowing that if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Pray the correct prayer. If I don't get my prayers exactly right, then God will do what I want him to do.
Mm.
Which is comforting, and would that it were true. Well, I don't know if that's true, actually, if I really want that, but certainly I can sort of see the temptation, I guess. So it's not a kind of so I'm kind of joining elliptically the pandemic and general suffering question with Jesus' death specifically as the sort of pointy end of that question. So sort of, when I say penal substitutionary atonement, people know what I mean, right? That's the sort of evangelical theology that a lot of us grew up with. Well, in fact, it's not even evangelical, it's Western. The Catholic theology is identical, really. It comes from Anselm in the 11th century, really. In its the form we have it anyway. But the problem is, so God wants to forgive us, but somehow isn't able to, unless he enters into this, and definitely a he, enters into this exchange, which makes it possible for him to forgive. It's very, it has the advantage of being clear. Well, perhaps not when I explain it, but it works well on a tract because we kind of understand what it might mean to exchange something for something else. But it's a funny picture of God, really, but it makes Jesus very separate from God. It sort of like that as people come across the idea of crucifixion as divine child abuse. You haven't heard that term?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not some people.
Yes, I've heard that. It's yeah. And I can understand why people would say that.
Yeah, I've heard the concept.
Mm.
Yeah, because it kind of comes from this too great a separation between Jesus and on the one hand and God on the other hand. It's not at its edges. It's not very good theology. Not very Trinitarian. We ought to say that anything that is true of Jesus is true of God, and so when it's too much, Jesus doing this. Anyway, this is far too complicated for 9:05 on a student conversation. Goodness. So here's a good example of the kind of straightforward, kind of old-fashioned type faith, which straight line God's plan. Let me read it.
Good source.
Good source, exactly. For some, it's quite familiar. Now, this is a real old-time religion, isn't it? Was Jesus' death on the cross the result of God's best laid plans going wrong? Did human sin take God by surprise? Was there an emergency plan B forced upon the creative universe after the fall in Genesis? No. Jesus went to the cross exactly as God had intended before the world began. This Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, who crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men, Acts 2:23. Jesus is the very design and accomplishment of God's eternal wisdom. The plan of redemption was not a necessary afterthought to remedy a plan gone wrong. Jesus Christ had purposed to redeem us from eternity past. His work on the cross is nothing short of a pinnacle of a revelation of God's eternal and sovereign wisdom. This means that when you have faith in Jesus Christ, his promise of salvation is as sure as God's eternal power. No surprises, just the execution of eternal wisdom. So I'm not actually entirely opposed to this, to be honest, even if it does come from answersgenesis.org. I like this means that when you have faith in Jesus Christ, his promise of salvation is sure as God's eternal power. I think that actually does get to something good, which we'll get to in a second. But this picture of God, which the picture of God a lot of people think Christians have, is very much this kind of fundamentalist image of God with this worked out plan, which was always going to be. So hence the question about Judas. Like in this kind of linear kind of railway plan. Like it's like God is it's like God is running a railway. We can't have extra trains that are roving around place on railways. It's all got to be set out at the beginning. Yes, God, and this picture of God from Blake is the illustration about God as the measurer and designer and kind of engineer of the universe. So everything kind of linear and clockwork. And in that kind of context, it's hard to see how, if that's given that image of God, it's hard to see how God could change his mind, or how things which happen must be God's fault because God's really done everything. We've talked about free will, and that's a really complicated question, in fact. But that's a sort of picture of God that is God anyway. But a lot of us have come from, and which we're trying to. And I think it's got something, and it's not entirely wrong. I think that's what makes me interested in it. The people sort of get where I'm coming from about this very linear, and it's not quite complicated, I guess. It's a very linear picture of God and God's plans. I can't see people's faces very well. They come across this sort of thinking, right? Some people
absolutely.
Yeah. And then if you question that in some of the churches we've come from, it's been seen as, well, you're questioning the faith and you're doubting, and maybe it's time you pull your socks up. Yeah.
Yes, it's sort of there's this idea in this that God surely would know everything and therefore couldn't be taken by surprise by human sin, for example, and must have intended everything right from the very beginning in this way.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. That's exactly it. So there's this is very complicated, isn't it? Can God change his mind? That's a big question for 5,009. So traditionally, people have said, I'll go through this really, really quickly because it's probably there's a lot more to it. But Christians have traditionally said that God can't change. Unchanging is one of the attributes of God, and there's good philosophical reasons for it. Because if God exists outside of time, as I think someone said before, how can you change if you're outside of time? Because change applies before and after, needs time. A second one, and this is more kind of Greek philosophy. If God's perfect, then any change in state must be to a less perfect state, and God's perfect, therefore, can't move between states. So it's like numbers. Like if 2 changed, how weird that would be, right? Or if 2 times 2 sometimes equal 5 and sometimes equal 4, that'd be strange, right? It's absurd. You couldn't say that. So that's what in this philosophical way of looking at things, God's changing would be. It's not so much. It's a bit shocking, but maybe it just doesn't make any sense any more than 2 times 2 sometimes equaling 5. But it doesn't make any sense, right? Is this
right?
You can sort of see this as an idea. You don't have to agree with it necessarily, but you can go. This is what's underlying.
I like the math analogy. It's simple. It's like, oh yeah, well you can't change 2 times 2 to something equal 5 because then it's not the thing that it always is.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense. It's just illogical. Yeah. So to say God changes from this perspective, it just doesn't make. It's just a non sequitur. It doesn't kind of follow.
But I guess it's interesting that there's quite a few examples, like biblical examples, where it says God changed his mind. But
so you read my mind. This is Moses speaking to God. Turn your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. You do not remember, God didn't bring disaster on the people of Israel. Not at that time anyway. So we've got what? So the interesting thing to me is this statement of faith, courtesy of Answer in Genesis, thinks of itself as being very biblical, right? If you said, where did this idea come from? They'd say it's straight from the Bible, wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm.
They'd say, if you knew the Bible like I knew the Bible, you'd see it's very clear. But actually, the ideas come from here, from philosophical ideas, which come from a different tradition entirely, which I don't think are nonsensical or just wrong in a straightforward way, but it's not obvious how you get from this picture of God to this linear, standing outside, unchangeable God. So this is hence what Hall has to say of providence, which is providence being God's action in history, let's say. The biblical narrative of a God whose providence is mysterious, internal, and intentional involvement in history. A God obliged by his own love to exercise his power quietly, subtly, and usually responsibly in relation to the always ambiguous and frequently evil deeds of the free creatures. A God who will not impose rectitude upon the world, but labour to bring existing wrong into the service of the good. A God, in short, who will suffer. Now, this isn't to say that God can't make all things right, and we are coming up to Easter, where I'd want to say that God really did do something, but it's not the straightforward kind of linear thing that our philosophical tradition kind of wants it to be. So hence my question. Anyway, is God's interaction with the world more like taking a train or driving a car? So driving a car, you're going to respond, like Anne said about intention, you need to get to somewhere, and if the traffic's bad and Google Maps have got a better idea. Whereas a train is just going to go where it's going to go, all things being equal. So I'm rushing through this because I want to get to the important thing. Because I think that a reconstruction point. So we talk about how to keep the bathwater and lose the baby. How to keep the baby, lose the bathwater. Something about babies and bathwater, I'm a little confused. In English, we use belief in God or faith in God in a lot of different ways. So there's a distinction to be drawn between this sort of head faith, this philosophical, straightforward knowing the facts, calculating the odds. We move from purely a census faith, belief. We think you have the answers, that ideology question from before, a nice controlled system. To fides, trust. We trust in the love of God, who we don't control, who we don't fully understand, but who has revealed God's self in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And I think that's where I'm going to end it. I think it's my last slide. So I think that's the journey of faith, is becoming someone of whom that's true, I think. So it moves us out of the kind of idea-y kind of left brain kind of answers from Genesis type idea to a situation we don't need to have all the answers. You can look at the sort of chaos in the world, I think, and still see God at work without having to say the coronavirus means X, Y, or Z. And that Jesus' death isn't some sort of sadistic kind of weird role-playing exercise by God, but more kind of responsive, but also somehow part of God's plan, I think. But God can be trusted.
I like that quote.
This is just me, in fact. That's why it's in English rather than multi-syllable quasi-Latin.
What's the census? Is that Greek?
Oh, no, that's Latin.
Oh, sorry.
A census.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit of Latin.
Use Latin wherever we can.
Lightly Latin. Well, it's only because we don't have words in English which exactly mean these things. So a census is like assent, like when he was sent
Hmm.
when he was sent to a proposition, and fides, like fidelity, is like gets the trust element. Whereas in English, we kind of trust, belief, faith. They all kind of come together, really, but they're not very distinguishable. So this is very traditional language, traditional reform language for the sort of, like, you want to have a census. You want to have, I mean, I think you can't just have trust without any belief. Well, I think it's difficult. I don't know, but certainly having a census belief without trust in God's a bit pointless, I think. Apart from anything else, eventually reality intervenes, and you either split somehow, or people's faith kind of doesn't really cope with it, because anyway, for reasons we've talked about a million times. It is 9:15. We've probably got a minute or so late. Does anyone have any last minute reflections that I'd like to kind of share? Sorry, it's been very, very, very head based, but it's all about the feelings from the rest of the week.
I like head based stuff. You're going to share these as normal, right, Alistair?
Yep,
and
I am.
I can, go back, and I might ask you some questions later, actually.
I'm thinking I might make the a chapter of a book available, because it's really largely drawn from Hall's book, and it's worth reading. I mean, it's fairly dense, but he goes into more. He spells it out better because it's a book rather than a 25-minute
I think I would sort of, my comment is that it's very easy for me to think, oh yes, back in the day I was simplistic and I had an ideology and I had, a particular way of thinking. But probably I need to recognise that I'm still prone to that as well. It's not something that's all in the past for me. I can still find myself going in that sort of more simplistic direction as well.
Okay, why don't we pray Jesus' prayer together, and then I will bless us and release us. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. Jesus said, "Remember that I am with you to the end of the age. And the blessing of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be amongst us and remain with us evermore. Amen." Wales dismissal. Say, happy quarantining. Be at peace.
Yes.
And do stop. Do if you feel even vaguely inclined, do come to some of the Easter stuff, because I think it's good. This has been very head and far too fast. But the actual experience is probably more important than reflection on it. So it's a.
So, Alistair, is the stuff for Friday and Thursday and Sunday, were they all in the most recent Cafechurch email?
They should be.
Are you
I'll
sending
resend.
Okay.
I'll send a link again to make sure. Especially because Zoom have changed their how things work with passwords as a result of kind of attention. So that's why Izzy was having difficulty logging on.
It's good to see you, Joe.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah.
Bye,
Joe.
Oh.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
All right. See you next
night. Thanks, Alistair.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks.
See you all. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.